Well, I guess I had never considered myself as needing a wood chipper in my life, but here we are. Now, most people probably don't need to own a wood chipper, but in the case that you might need to use or rent or buy one, or if you're just genuinely curious about wood chippers, I figured I'd go through the ins and outs of a consumer grade wood chipper and talk through the details of how these work and what they might be used for so that you can have a better understanding of wood chippers. So maybe a good place to start is why I need a wood chipper in the first place. So since I moved into my house, I've got about a half acre here with a forested area behind it. And since I moved in, everything that was behind my house has been largely unmaintained and overgrown. On top of that, in the last year, I had 6 dead trees that were over 50 feet tall that I had a crew come in and drop, and they basically delimbed them and bucked them into smaller logs. But it left a ton of debris and material to work through. And in order to basically get rid of that and reclaim my property back from all of that debris, the wood chipper itself has been absolutely essential in the overall ordeal. So without this, I wouldn't be able to make the progress that I need to in order to reclaim basically my land behind my house. Let's start with an overview of the chipper itself. So this is actually a chipper shredder, and you'll find that most consumer units are kind of that 2-in-1 where it's a shredder as well as a chipper. These are most frequently designated by kind of 2 functions here. The motor size itself, in this case, this is an 8 horsepower motor, and then the actual inlet size for the chipper, which it'll take up to 3-inch branches or logs. In the top here, this is where you'll find the shredder portion of it, and this will basically take your, debris, brush, leaves, kind of lightweight yard waste type stuff, up to about 3/4 of an inch diameter thick for branches. It sends it into a tumbler, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and basically shreds that material up. In the lower portion here is where you'll actually find the chipper function itself. And this is where you'll feed in branches, and it'll go through a blade and chip it into basically that kind of those wood or bark chips that you're kind of used to from seeing. And so basically those are the main functions of the overall chipper itself. Although a pretty large and powerful machine, the chipper shredder is made up of a few pretty simplistic components. On this end, you have the engine itself. And over here, inside this cavity here, you have a drum that serves 2 purposes. For the shredder, basically as you feed material down, it goes through a tumbler with a series of knives in it that'll ultimately spit out the other side and shred up the material. And then for this side here, the chipper side, it basically comes into the side of the drum where there's a couple of blades. We'll take a look at what that looks like in just a second. But those blades will come through and basically chip the end off of the material as it feeds in and ultimately turn it into those small little chips that you're used to seeing. To engage the motor to the drum that both shreds and chips, you basically have a clutching mechanism on the side. In this case, this is a lever that drops down and engages a belt, which puts tension between the drum and the engine to get the rotation going up so that the drum can cut through the material itself. Coming around to the back side of the chipper shredder, you can see here that this is basically where all of the material will be ejected out of the shredder. So from the top, if you're shredding material, it'll come down through this hopper and then fall into this drum of rotating knives. As those knives pass through the material, it'll shred it up. And then once it's shredded up, it'll be ejected out through this screen. If you're chipping material, over here as you put it in, those blades will chop up and chip away the wood or whatever it is that you're putting through there. And those are typically going to be small enough to pass through the screen already. The screen holes are actually serving a purpose by the size that they are. If you put things through the shredder itself, they will not come through those holes until they've been shredded up small enough to actually pass through. And so that's why it's designed the way it is, so that the material that's being shredded can actually get small enough and come out and be ejected at the right size that you want for a shredder. So let's go ahead and take this screen off so we can get a closer look at what's going on inside here. So as I mentioned earlier, there's 2 components to this drum inside the chipper shredder. In the main portion of it, this drum here serves as the shredding function. And you can see that there's a series of kind of floating knife-like blades in here, and they go carry throughout kind of the entire unit here and swing freely, so that when this drum is spinning really fast, basically these knives are all the way out, and they'll be processing through the material that's passed through overall. On the left-hand side here, you'll see that we've got a blade on this side, and as that material is fed in through the chipper portion, this blade will cut through that and actually chip off little pieces. And there's one on this side of the drum and one on the other side of the drum. Taking a closer look at the blade itself, basically, as it connects with the material, it will not only chip off a little piece of it, but it'll also pull the material in because of the angle of the blade. And so as you have a branch that you're putting in, it'll start to pull the logs in and chip off little pieces and kind of suck them down through the chute. And then all of those pieces, whether they're chipped or shredded, will come down in here and ultimately get ejected out of the side. These blades have two sides to them so that you can sharpen both sides of them, and then basically you'll be able to put them in here, and then rather than having to go back and sharpen, as you service it while you're doing the work, you can just flip the blades so that you can continue on with your work without having to sharpen them before you kind of start over again. Let's take a closer look at each of the functions. So up top, we've got the shredder with the bigger hopper up there. Down below, we have the chipper with the smaller hopper. And basically, you can see it's a hard metal tube that gets narrower as it goes towards the bottom. If we look inside, you can see that it's kind of a conical shape. And then at the very bottom, you can see there that we have the blades that will rotate on that drum, pass through the branches, and ultimately chip off the pieces of it. If we back out a little bit here and come up top, this is that shredder portion. It's got a wider hopper because your material is going to be, a lot more kind of bushy and looser material. And so you're going to be able to kind of, I guess, cram that into this hopper overall. But basically, it'll feed in here. And if we come inside, you'll see that those are those floating knives kind of down at the bottom. And the hopper basically funnels all of that material down into the rotating drum. Those ultimately cut through that material, and then, as I said before, we'll shoot them out this screen when it's small enough overall. So when you're using the chipper function of the chipper, you're going to want to make sure that your material is relatively straight. You want to make sure that there's no kind of crooks or outward branches on the end, because that'll ultimately get stuck as it feeds down into the narrower portion of the hopper. What you don't want to end up with is a situation where you have the machine running and a branch like this that's stuck with this part at the bottom, and it gets wedged in there pretty hard. Again, you want to have really sharp blades so that it does pull the material in. And when the blades are really sharp and it's pulling the material in, with something like this on the end, it can pull it in there and get stuck pretty hard. And so to avoid hurting yourself, you basically are going to have to shut the entire machine down and unwedge that component. So you want to make sure that you don't have anything like this. It's really good practice to have a set of loppers sitting around so that you can basically cut pieces like this off and have something more like this, which is a bigger, straighter component that'll feed in really nicely overall. Similarly, you don't want something that's kind of too curved like this. Basically, if it's too curved, again, once it gets to that tighter section at the bottom, it also will wedge itself in there and you can't get it out. So really sharp blades to pull the material in, nothing too curved, and very, very important, don't reach in to try to pull that material out past this kind of opening here. You'll have to shut down the machine entirely to retrieve that and kind of unjam it, if you will. The shredder portion of this is a lot more straightforward. You're going to take your looser material and push it in through the top in the hopper. Although it looks like it'd be easier to get material in here because this hopper is a lot larger, typically the type of material will have like leaves or branches that are kind of sticking out in all directions, and it makes it a lot harder to actually get this functioning in a way that you'd want it to. And so, it's really important to focus on things like how much stuff you're trying to put in all at once. Don't overstuff it, because it basically will all jam up in the hopper, won't go down into the blades, and won't feed through. So limit your amount, and then also the orientation of it. The more that you can kind of get it all oriented the right direction, and the hopper itself kind of feeds down, and in this case over to my left here. And so I try to always kind of bundle it and point it in that direction. Now, you're going to want to be really, really careful, especially with this top portion, because although both portions pull material in, this is a rotating drum and it's going at full speed with a 8 horsepower motor pulling it. And so when you're putting material in, it's really, really important to ensure that you don't have anything that will catch, obviously no loose clothing, but you also want to ensure that you don't have anything on like those branches that say you're putting in that may have a hook behind them at the top end that may pull your hand or your neck or anything like that as it's going in. Because once it grabs that branch, it will suck it in, and it'll do so violently. And it basically is taking that material with it and bringing it into the drum to shred it up. So really, really important that you're thinking about, how you're orienting this and able to get your hands free as you put that material in through the top hopper to get shredded. When going to use the chipper, there's a few pieces of kind of vital protection for safety equipment. You're definitely going to want some sort of facial protection, not just eyes, but your whole face. Things can get kicked back out of both the chipper portion as well as the shredder portion. Even down at the end here where the output is, a lot of stuff can come flying. So it's really important that you'll have facial protection. You'll want ear protection. This is really, really loud machine overall, even when it's running and nothing's going through it. And then you're definitely going to want a good pair of gloves. Gloves help for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the material that you're working with, if it kind of cuts you or grabs your hands or anything like that, you'll have some gloves on. But also, this machine vibrates pretty violently. And so although that helps with getting the material down in there, when you're holding on to sticks and things like that, it can really kind of bash your hands or knuckles around as it's taking in that material. And so gloves are going to be super helpful there. Other considerations while working with the chipper, you're going to want to make sure that as the output material gets ejected, it'll start to build a pile on the output side near the screen down here. And basically it'll ultimately kind of back up, especially with the shredder portion. And for it to eject material and continue shredding in the right way, you'll need to keep that area clear. So anything you can do to kind of keep this clear as you go through material and have that kind of shredded or bark output, while it's running, you might just kind of kick it to the side, but as you get bigger material, you'll want to bigger piles of material, you'll want to have something like a rake handy, stop for a minute, clear out the space, and ultimately keep that open for stuff to go out. And then again, kind of reminder on the chipper blades, those you're going to want to keep really sharp so that that material can go in easily. If you find yourself forcing the branches through the chipper, it's time to stop and actually sharpen those blades, because it can be dangerous if you're starting to force that and push the material into the machine. I'll show you startup really quick on the machine, and then we'll get over to shredding and chipping some material. Again, you basically are starting the motor, engaging it to the drum with the clutching mechanism here, and that's kind of it. The one thing to note is that this particular machine is a belt drive connection, and so you'll kind of have to ease in the actual belt drive connection so that it doesn't kind of just rip through and burn up the belt. And so you'll get the motor going, you'll ease the clutching or the belt into the drum, let it kind of get rolling, and then fully engage it, and then it'll be running. So let's give it a shot.
Now I'm going to put the clutch on.
And here's a close-up of what it looks like once the drum starts to engage to the motor. See here that basically the material that comes out when you run it through the shredder, even if it sticks, ends up being these kind of long shredded type components here. You don't get the nice fine chips as you would if you're running some sort of the chipper side of things. So it kind of just, as it says, shreds up the material because it's running through those knives. There's no like blade just running against it overall. see now that I've run the chipper side of things, it's actually closer to wood chips as opposed to that shredded material that was underneath there. So now we're getting more of a chipped up type material, and that's more of the wood chips that you're used to having run through the chipper and not the shredder. Now, although a wood chipper can seem like a pretty aggressive and violent machine, they're pretty simple overall, and they can get through a surprising amount of material. I wouldn't be able to do everything that I needed to do here without this machine. And so I'd be left with a bunch of debris and unusable space. And so because of that, this is mine now. And now I'm a guy with a wood chipper.